Before we begin, make yourself comfortable. Let the weight of the day fall away. Dim the lights. Take a deep breath. You're about to drift into a world older than memory, where gods walked beside men, and glory came at a terrible cost. This is the story of the Iliad, of Troy, of Achilles, of rage, love, and fate. If you enjoy journeys through ancient times told in a gentle, meditative voice, consider subscribing to the channel. It helps more people find their way here, and ensures there's always another story waiting when you close your eyes. Now close them, let the fire crackle, and let us begin. Chapter 1. The apple that split the world. The story begins not with ships or war cries, nor with the clash of bronze and the fall of cities, but far above the world of men, in the breathless eternal light of Olympus. Here in the halls where time folds and unravels like silk, the gods live outside of sorrow. Wine never runs dry, music never ceases. The seasons bow to their will, and the stars bend their courses around their revels. It is a place untouched by grief, where ambrosia flows sweeter than honey, and none speak of endings. It is here that the gods have gathered for a wedding. Peleus, king of Phthia, favoured by the gods and counted among the bravest of mortal men, is to marry Thetis, daughter of the sea, child of Nereus, the old man of the deep, silver-footed and sorrowful. She is a nymph with the beauty of a storm just before it breaks, and the weight of fate already coiled around her, like foam on the tide. It is a strange union, man and immortal, flesh and wave. But it has been arranged by Zeus himself, not out of mercy or joy, but to avert a greater doom. For it was foretold that Thetis would bear a son, mightier than his father. No god dared take her to wife. And so she was given to a man, to Peleus. The halls of Olympus shine brighter than ever. The Graces dance. The Muses sing. Apollo plays his lyre, and Hera, seated in majesty, smiles thinly beside her husband. Athena speaks with Artemis in murmurs sharp as arrows. Dionysus pours dark wine into cups that never empty. The Horae, those daughters of the seasons, scatter petals underfoot, and laughter blooms like a summer storm. It is a celebration beyond mortal imagining. But in the space between notes, something dark stirs. She was not invited. Eris, daughter of night, goddess of discord. She brings no gift, no blessing. Only a smile that tastes like copper and a silence that presses like a blade. No chariot carries her. No herald names her. She comes alone, stepping into the feast like a shadow passing across the sun. No one greets her. No one dares. And so, with the grace of inevitability, she draws from the folds of her robe a single object, a golden apple, perfect in its symmetry, glowing softly in the torchlight. It is flawless, heavy with beauty, and something more ancient than malice. Etched into its side, in letters that gleam like starlight, are 3 words. To the fairest. She does not shout, she does not curse, she only lifts her hand and lets the apple fall. It rolls slowly, deliberately, across the floor of the gods' most sacred gathering. It comes to rest where no object should, between 3 goddesses. Hera, Athena, Aphrodite, the queen of heaven, the bringer of victory, and the giver of love. None of them laugh. None pretend it is not meant for her. Each claims it in silence, and then in word. Each reaches. Each refuses to yield. Hera, tall and regal, whose gaze can unmake kings, speaks first. She is wife to Zeus, mistress of Olympus, guardian of marriage and empire. Her voice is iron cloaked in silk. I am the queen of all that lives. This belongs to me. Athena, grey-eyed, born of wisdom and war, stands without blinking. Her armour glows, but her eyes are colder than polished bronze. I am victory. I guide heroes and shape cities. I am more than beauty. I am power with purpose. The apple is mine. Aphrodite says nothing at first. She smiles and it is enough. The air stirs around her. Even the gods pause when she moves. She is love, longing, lust, every desire that ever set the world to burning. There is no beauty without me, she says softly. The apple knows its home. The 3 goddesses turn to Zeus. They expect judgment. He is the father of gods, the wielder of thunder. He has ended wars with a word, toppled kingdoms with a glance. But now even he grows still. To choose one is to offend 2. To offend 2 goddesses is to unleash storms no thunderbolt can quell Hera is his queen, Athena his daughter. Aphrodite, too powerful to ignore. He has seen battles rise from lesser insults. And so, the king of Olympus chooses not to choose. Instead, he names a mortal. Let the judgment fall to one untainted by divine quarrel, he declares. Let a man decide, for his eyes are not clouded by immortality. The words echo through the halls, and the goddesses, burning with pride, aching for victory, accept. Some say Zeus knew exactly what he was doing. Others say he was afraid. But all agree on this. The mortal he named was no stranger to fate. His name was Paris. Paris, a shepherd, a prince, a shadow in the shape of a man. He does not know it yet, but the world will fracture at his name. He lives far from Troy, high on the slopes of Mount Ida, where the air is clean and the days fall soft upon the earth. He tends flocks, speaks with fellow herdsmen, and walks beneath open skies with no crown, no sword, no fear. Yet blood does not forget. He is the son of Priam, king of Troy, a prince born not to rule, but to ruin. At his birth, prophets trembled. A dream had come to Hecuba, his mother, a flaming torch held in her arms, burning down the city she loved. The priest read the signs and spoke clearly. This child would bring destruction to Troy. Priam, bound by love but chained by fear, could not bring himself to kill his infant son. Instead, he ordered the child exposed in the wilds of Ida, left to die. But fate does not lose her chosen. Paris lived. A shepherd found him, cradled in leaves and silence, and raised him as his own. He grew tall, strong, fairer than any man born to earth. His skin glowed bronze beneath the sun, his hair curled like fire. His voice was soft but certain. Even beasts bent to his will, and women turned when he passed. He had the face of a god, and in his heart he believed himself a man, until the goddesses came. They did not walk, they descended. 3 of them, brighter than fire, heavier than destiny. Hera, Athena, Aphrodite. Each veiled her divinity, just enough to keep the shepherd from dying on sight. Hermes, quick-tongued herald of the gods, stood beside them and spoke. You are to judge, son of Troy. The fairest of these 3 will receive the apple of Eris. It is your decision, and yours alone. Paris stood in silence. The world had not prepared him for this. His flocks grazed somewhere behind him, oblivious. The sky hummed with waiting. The grass bowed under the weight of their presence. Each goddess stepped forward in turn. Hera's voice was cool and distant, the voice of marble palaces and golden thrones. Choose me, Paris, she said, and I will give you dominion over all men. You will be king of kings. Empire shall follow in your wake. Your name will be spoken from east to west, etched into pillars, remembered in temples long after death. She smiled as if the offer were already accepted. Athena spoke next. Her tone was precise, her eyes like distant thunderclouds. Choose me, she said, and I will make you wise beyond all men. No army will defeat you. No council will outthink you. You will carve your name into history, not with brute force, but with brilliance. She stepped back. Her words folded in silence like steel in velvet. Then came Aphrodite. She did not declare, she did not explain. She smiled, and in that smile something broke open in Paris, something deep, ancient, nameless. I offer you not power, she said, nor wisdom. I offer you desire. I offer you the love of the most beautiful woman in the world. Her name is Helen. She lives in Sparta, bound by law but not by heart. She shall be yours. Choose me, and she will love you as no one ever has or ever will. There was no struggle in him. There should have been. But desire is a quiet god, and it does not argue. It only waits. Paris extended his hand. The golden apple passed to Aphrodite. The sky did not crack. The grass did not blacken. The mountain stood as it had before. But far off, in places no mortal could see, oaths began to stir, threads twisted, fates darkened. Athena turned without a word. Hera's gaze scorched like sunlight on bronze. Neither would forget, and the gods, smiling through gritted teeth, vanished into mist. Only Paris remained, the shepherd, the prince, the flame in human skin. He would go to Troy, and then he would go to Sparta. Paris descended from the mountain like a man carrying prophecy on his shoulders. though he himself did not yet feel its weight. He returned not to his sheep, nor to his shepherd's cloak, but to Troy. His identity revealed at last, he stood before King Priam in the great halls of Ilion, beneath ceilings painted with stars and spears. The old king received him with joy, not remembering the flames of the dream that had foretold this reunion. Hecuba wept. The people cheered. A lost son returned, no longer a boy of pastures, but a prince. Paris wore his beauty like a robe, and he moved through the city, like someone born to its gold. And yet his eyes were already turning west, for Aphrodite's promise still echoed in his blood, and it whispered one name above all others: Helen, the most beautiful woman in the world, daughter of Zeus, queen of Sparta. She was the wife of Menelaus, king of the house of Atreus, lord of one of the richest thrones in all Greece, bound by oaths, by law, by custom, but not perhaps by fate. Under the pretext of diplomacy, Paris sailed to Sparta. He brought gifts, fine cloth, silverwork, a lion's pelt, ivory figurines from the east. He came as guest, not thief, and Menelaus received him with honour, for in Greece the bond between host and guest, xenia, is sacred, older even than the names of cities. The palace of Sparta rose white and sharp against the hills, its stones polished by sunlight and time. It smelled of cedar and oil and burning meat. Courtyards rang with music. Slaves moved like shadows through the colonnades. And Paris, clothed in foreign silk, stepped through those halls with the poise of someone who already believed he belonged. Then Helen entered, and the world fell silent. She was not draped in jewels or crowned with flowers. She wore no perfume, no veil of mystery. She simply walked into the room, and yet in that instant nothing else could be seen. She was beauty without effort, grace without artifice. Her eyes held both distance and desire. She carried herself as someone who knew the weight of attention and had long ago stopped flinching from it. Her hair flowed like river shadow. Her voice, when she spoke, was low and measured, as if each word had already been considered and judged worthy. Paris saw her and remembered nothing else Aphrodite had said. He did not need to. Helen saw him, and something in her paused. She did not smile, but she did not turn away. They dined together, surrounded by musicians and servants. They walked the palace gardens beneath carved columns. They spoke of Troy, of music, of stars, of stories. Not once did either of them speak the name of what they were already becoming. And then Menelaus left. A funeral had called him to Crete, an old grandfather, a family rite. He trusted his wife. He trusted his guest. He left the palace, and with it, the last chance for peace. Because when the king was gone, Paris did not wait. Perhaps it was Aphrodite's doing, weaving silk into fire. Perhaps it was Paris himself, drunk on proximity, daring to grasp what had been promised. Perhaps it was Helen, who had grown tired of duty, of being prize and pedestal, mother and queen. Perhaps she saw in Paris not just a man, but an exit. That night they fled. Together they stole through the dark halls. Together they boarded the Trojan ship that waited beyond the harbour. Together they shattered the law of Xenia and kindled a war. They took more than themselves. Gold vanished, treasures loaded onto foreign decks. And with each step away from Sparta, another oath twisted into a weapon. When Menelaus returned and found his bed empty, his palace looted, and his name dishonoured, he did not howl. He called his brother, Agamemnon, lord of Mycenae, high king of the Achaeans, cold-eyed, iron-hearted, a man who saw insult not as wound, but as cause. Together they summoned the oath. Years ago, when Helen was not yet wed, her beauty had threatened to tear Greece apart. So wise Odysseus, cunning even then, had proposed that every man who sought her hand swear a solemn vow. To protect the one she chose, to avenge any insult against her marriage. The vow had bound them all, and now it would drag them to war. Messengers rode out like sparks from a flame, galloping through mountains and valleys. To Ithaca, to Pylos, to Argos, to Crete, to Thessaly. The kings of Greece were summoned, not with plea, but with right, and they answered. Nestor of Pylos, ancient and wise, brought counsel. Ajax of Salamis, towering and grim, brought brute force. Diomedes of Argos, fierce and shining, brought fury. Odysseus of Ithaca, reluctant and sharp, brought cunning. And from Phthia, after delay and omen, came Achilles, son of Thetis, prince of wrath. He did not know yet that his name would become legend. He only knew he hated Agamemnon, and he loved the roar of battle. 1,000 black ships gathered. Sails rose like teeth against the horizon. And over it all, Helen stood on Troy's walls, watching. She had become more than woman. She was myth now, and myths never die quietly. Chapter 2. The long shoreline of waiting. They came from every corner of the Greek world, from sun-baked islands and mountain passes, from cities of marble and villages of dust. At first the call to war passed like rumour. Then it became a wind, then a storm. When Helen vanished from Sparta, the oath that had once seemed ceremonial now moved with the force of command. Her name, once sung in love poems and marriage hymns, was now carved into war banners. She was no longer a queen. She was a symbol, and symbols do not choose their uses. Menelaus had been humiliated, his palace desecrated, his wife stolen not by a raider but by a guest. It was not only his honour that had been broken, it was Xenia, the sacred bond between host and guest. And so he called on the oath, and the oath answered. Agamemnon, king of Mycenae, brother of Menelaus and warlord of unrivalled reach, took command. The sceptre passed to him not by vote, but by gravity. He was not loved, but he was obeyed. His words were few but heavy. His gaze found men and made them choose sides. His halls rang with the clamour of bronze being polished, of chariot wheels being fitted, of war, of war. To fulfil the vow, he sent heralds across the land. They rode west to Pylos, where Nestor, king of sand-coloured cliffs and long memories, rose from his chair like a carved god and gave his sons command of his ships. They rode to Salamis, where Ajax the Greater stood like a tower and spoke nothing. But when the herald finished, he simply nodded and began sharpening his spear. They crossed the straits to Crete, where Idomeneus, king of Minos, brought forth 100 ships. They came to Argos, where Diomedes, young and hot with glory, swore to make Troy bleed. And they came to Ithaca. There they found a man not eager for war. Odysseus, king of wily mind, had married Penelope and watched his newborn son take his first breaths. When the herald arrived, Odysseus feigned madness, ploughing the shore with salt and oxen yoked beside a mule. But the ruse failed. The child was placed before the plough. Odysseus swerved. He was clever, but fate was older. Even Achilles was summoned, though he came last and under stars clouded with omen. In the white halls of Phthia, Thetis wept. She had known from the moment he was born that his life would be short. A son of both mortal and divine, Achilles was destined for greatness but not for peace. She had tried to save him once, dipping him into the Styx, making his flesh untouchable by blade or flame. But the heel by which she held him remained mortal. Now she tried again. She sent him away, disguised as a girl, hidden among the daughters of Lycomedes on the island of Skyros. She hoped the call to war would pass by unnoticed, but war does not lose what it wants. Odysseus found him. The stories say he laid gifts before the young women, silk, jewels, perfume, and one sword. While the others admired the glittering baubles, one hand reached for the hilt. Achilles, the truth was out, the disguise fell, and with it, the last illusion of safety. He did not protest. He went to war with his companion Patroclus and the warriors of Phthia. Myrmidons, black-armoured and silent, men who fought as if they remembered the womb of the earth. So the fleet gathered. 1,000 ships, dark-hulled and sharp-prowed, crowded the coast of Aulis. They waited like wolves at the edge of water, sails rolled tight, men sharpening bronze and retelling dreams. But the winds did not rise. Days passed, then weeks. The sea remained glass, the omens were dark. The seers whispered that Artemis, goddess of the hunt and the moon, was displeased. The reasons were many, Agamemnon's pride chief among them. He had hunted in her sacred groves, he had boasted in her name, and now she demanded a price, a sacrifice. Iphigenia, his daughter. Agamemnon raged, he argued, he wept, but in the end he obeyed. The girl was brought, told she would wed Achilles. She came in white with ribbons in her hair. There was no wedding, only an altar. Some say Artemis took pity and whisked her away. Others say the blade fell. The wind rose either way. The fleet set sail. Black sails filled the Aegean. The sea, once wide and eternal, became a road. And the gods watched, some in delight, others in silence. The Greeks landed not with banners but with blood. They struck a mistake first, Mysia, not Troy. and Achilles wounded the son of Heracles. The boy bled, and the Greeks retreated. Troy would wait. When at last the ships reached the shores of the Troad, they found the coast steep and empty. The Trojans did not come to meet them. The Greeks built a camp, fortified, sprawling, lined with ships drawn onto the sand, like teeth in a great open jaw. The siege began, and then it did not end. Not for 1 year, not for 2, but for 9. There was no swift victory, no breach of walls, no sudden conquest. The Greeks had come in fury, yes, but Troy did not fall. Its walls, vast and towering, rose as if built not by mortal hands, but by gods themselves. And indeed they were. In ages past, Poseidon and Apollo had laboured side by side to build the city's fortifications as penance for a slight. The stones they laid were heavy with magic and song. No siege engine could crack them. No ladder could reach them without slaughter. So the war slowed. The swift campaign dreamed of by Agamemnon turned to a long siege. One not of weeks or months, but of years. At first, the Greeks had tried to lure the Trojans into open battle. They sent challenges to the gates. They burned the fields outside the walls. They raided nearby towns, hoping to provoke a counterattack. But Priam, old and wise, refused to be drawn. Troy's army stayed within its walls. The city had stores of grain, wells of clean water and patience. The Greeks, by contrast, were exposed. Their ships formed a barrier against retreat, but also a prison. Behind them, a plain scorched by war. Before them, a city that would not fall. They built ramparts of earth and timber to defend the camp. They dug trenches, they posted sentries. They hunted in the woods and stole from villages. And they waited. 9 years passed like stones into a pit. The fire that had burned so brightly in the beginning, vengeance, glory, oath, dimmed to embers. There were battles, yes, skirmishes in the dust, single combats before the gates, raids at night. But no resolution. The war became a rhythm, then a ritual. And in that ritual, the men changed. The younger soldiers became veterans. Those who had sailed as boys grew beards. Some went mad under the sun. Others simply faded, dull-eyed, silent, broken by monotony. Their armour rusted. Their sandals wore thin. Their songs lost their joy. Even the gods grew bored. Some looked away. Others began to choose favourites. Troy was not idle. From within the walls came sons of kings and heroes in their own right. Hector, prince of Troy, led most charges, his armour like flame, his movements clean and unhurried. He fought not for glory but for duty, for wife, for child, for city. His brother Deiphobus stood beside him. Aeneas, son of Anchises and of Aphrodite herself, became a blade in the darkness. Sarpedon came from Lycia, a cousin of Zeus. Others followed, warriors in eastern armour, with curved blades and silver beards. Troy was not only a city, it was a cause, and men answered its call. The Greeks, meanwhile, began to splinter. Among so many kings, pride became the true enemy. Agamemnon, though high king, was not beloved. His power lay in his army's size, not in his character. He demanded obedience but offered no warmth. He insulted freely. He took what he wanted. Achilles, young and glorious, did not forget such things. He was the war's greatest weapon, the son of Thetis, swift-footed, golden-haired, beloved of gods. His myrmidons fought like shadows given form. His spear never missed. His wrath burned hotter than the sun. But he was not a tool. He had pride of his own, and pride, like rot, worked best from the inside. By the 9th year, the Greek army had grown weary of Agamemnon's commands. They fought, but without joy. They endured, but without conviction. Only Achilles still fought, as if the world were watching. Only he moved through battle like a thing made for it. But even he could not win the war alone. The plains grew dusty with bones. Horses starved, spears shattered, shields cracked. The sun grew hotter each season, and the gods no longer shaded the men who prayed. Honour turned to survival. Survival turned to apathy. And yet, still they stayed. They stayed for pride, for memory, for the oath, for Helen. They stayed because going home without victory would mean that none of it had mattered. But beneath that dry, waiting sky, something worse than fatigue began to bloom. Something heavier than bronze. Something older than rage. Resentment. It waited in the shadows. It thickened in the tents, it stirred behind cold eyes, and when it broke, it would break from within. The gods had grown quiet, their voices no longer stirred the leaves, their signs grew subtle. They had chosen sides, but in secret. They whispered into dreams and watched from behind clouds. Only Apollo still walked among men openly, and when he came, he did not come with blessings. He came with plague. The cause was small by the measure of gods, but vast by the measure of pride. Among the spoils of a recent raid on a neighbouring town, Agamemnon had taken a girl, a daughter of a priest of Apollo. Her name was Chryseis. Her father, Chryses, had followed her to the Greek camp, with gold in his hands and supplication in his voice. He came not with threats, but with reverence. He knelt. He begged. He reminded the Greeks of the sacred law of ransom, of the power of the god he served. Agamemnon spat on the words. He mocked the priest, dismissed the gifts, and sent him away with nothing but humiliation. The old man returned to the shore and lifted his arms to the heavens. He did not raise his voice. He prayed in whispers. Lord of the silver bow, he said, if ever I burn the thigh bones of goats upon your altar, if ever I crowned your temple with garlands, grant me this, make them pay. And Apollo heard. He came not with lyre but with bow. His arrows, invisible, sang through the air and found flesh. Mules died first, then dogs, then men. The plague spread like fire beneath dry pine. No helmet could shield against it. No courage could repel it. Soldiers died where they stood. The funeral pyres blackened the beaches. Grief became routine. For 9 days the Greeks suffered. On the 10th, Achilles called an assembly. He did not come as supplicant, but as judge. He stood before the kings, his hair gleaming like sunlight, his eyes filled with fire, and he spoke not to them, but through them. We must find the cause, he said. This is no sickness of earth. It is divine. We must answer it, or we will rot here in the sand before Troy ever falls. A seer was brought forth, Calchas, wise and trembling. He knew the truth. He knew what words would follow, but he also knew what it would cost to speak them. I will tell you, Calchas said, but only if I am protected. My answer will anger the one who rules this army. Achilles nodded. I swear, no hand will touch you, not while I draw breath. And so Calchas spoke. He told the tale of Chryses, of the insult, of the god's anger. He will not relent, the seer said, until the girl is returned to her father without ransom, and a sacrifice made in apology. The camp fell silent. Every eye turned to Agamemnon. The king's face darkened like storm clouds. His jaw clenched. His hand rested on the hilt of his sword. You would have me give up my prize? He said, voice low and cold. So be it. I will return the girl, but I will not be the only one among us without honour. He turned to Achilles. I will take your prize in return. Briseis. A single thread snapped. Achilles stood. There was no shouting, only steel in his gaze. His hand went to his sword, and for a moment, one long breath, everyone believed he would strike down the High King where he stood. But before the blade left its sheath, a presence filled the air. Athena. Invisible to all but Achilles, she placed a hand upon his shoulder. Her voice entered only his mind, cool and clear. Do not strike, she said. Not yet. There will come a time, and when it comes, the blood will run thick. But not now. He lowered his hand, but his fury did not fall with it. He turned back to the assembly. You greedy, shameless dog, he said. We came here not for you, but for honour. I have fought more battles than any man here, and yet you would take from me not by merit, but by theft. I will fight no more. I will not bleed so that you may grow fat on victory. With those words he left the field. Briseis was taken. She wept but made no protest. She had learned already that in war, a woman's silence is her last shield. Achilles watched her go without a word. But inside him, something colder than grief took root. He walked to the shore, alone. He called upon his mother. From the depths of the sea she rose, silver-footed Thetis, veiled in salt and sorrow. She looked upon her son and knew what had been done. He knelt before her, proud Achilles whose wrath had once shaken cities. Now he asked for something darker than vengeance. Go to Zeus, he said. Remind him of the favours he owes you. Ask him to turn the tide. Ask him to let the Trojans win, until Agamemnon sees what I am. And Thetis, bound by love, nodded. Even the gods cannot undo what follows when Achilles withdraws. The greatest warrior of the Greeks has left the field. And now, the war will change. Not because Troy has grown stronger, but because the Greeks have begun to rot from within. Chapter 3. The man beneath the helmet, Troy still stood. 9 years of war had worn deep scars into the plains that stretched between the city and the sea. Earth once golden with barley had turned to dust churned by chariot wheels and stained by blood. Bones bleached beneath the sun, forgotten beneath the feet of new soldiers, who bled where others had bled before them. Yet behind its vast gates, behind its walls that touched the clouds, Troy endured. The city stood not by miracle, nor by divine indulgence alone, but because men held it. Men who rose before dawn and trained with dull swords. Men who buried their fathers and sent their sons to the walls. Men who still believed, despite everything, that it was not just a city, but a home. And at the heart of it all stood Hector. He was not the most beautiful of men, nor the most charming. His voice carried neither silver nor thunder, but his presence made silence. He did not ask for devotion. It followed him like a shadow, shaped by the way he moved through the streets of his birth. Upright, measured, without pretense. He was the eldest son of Priam and Hecuba, heir to a city that had become myth while still alive, a prince by blood, a warrior by necessity, a commander by consequence. Where Paris was beloved and reckless, Hector was trusted. Where Deiphobus plotted and Polydamas advised, Hector acted. His armour was not gilded but polished by the hands of squires who worshipped him like a god. His sword was not enchanted, but it never missed, and his gaze, weary, clear, sharp, seemed always fixed just beyond the edge of ruin. Each morning he rose not to chase glory, but to keep death from entering the gates. That was what it meant to be Troy's shield. He walked the city before battle, quietly. The people bowed. Old men touched his cloak with trembling fingers. Mothers held up infants as though his glance might bless them. He did not smile. He nodded and kept walking. On the western edge of the city, past the rows of cypress trees and broken statues of older gods, rose the great palace of Priam. High-walled, flanked by pillars of stone, dragged up from distant quarries in the time of his father. Inside, marble cooled the air, and servants moved like shadows. The scent of oil, myrrh, and wax hung like incense. Here Hector was not commander. He was son, husband, father. In the inner court his wife sat weaving by the fountain. Andromache, daughter of Cilician Thebes, once noble in her own land, now queen of a city under siege. Her beauty was quiet. Not the striking flame of Helen, but the soft, steady strength of water that never stops flowing. She had lost her father and brothers to Achilles' spear. Her grief never left her, but it did not rule her. She ruled it, and with her, in a shaded alcove, their son. Astyanax, the city's little lord, barely able to walk but already playing with a wooden sword. His laughter echoed in the stones. When Hector entered, the child ran to him, fearless. And Hector, breaker of men, destroyer of horse and shield, lifted his son high and let himself smile. It was only here in this space that the helmet came off. Andromache rose, quiet as always, but her hands betrayed her. She touched his shoulders longer than needed. Her eyes searched his face like one trying to memorize it before it disappeared. She'd heard rumours. The Greeks had rallied in Achilles' absence. Agamemnon had raged across the field. Ajax had nearly breached the wall. The tide was turning. She had lost everyone else already. "Do not go out again today," she said. "I know your courage. I know your strength. But they are not what concern me. The gods favour who they will, and they favour the one they choose to kill. Stay with us. Fight from the rampart. Let others lead." He did not answer at once. Instead, he looked at the child in his arms, at the hands too small to hold a blade, at the soft curve of the boy's cheek, the roundness not yet stolen by fear or grief. "I would stay," he said quietly, "if staying meant safety, if retreat preserved the city. But it doesn't. The enemy is not at the gate. They are in the earth beneath it. They wait, year after year, not for the chance to fight me, but for the moment I no longer do." He handed the child back to her. "When I die," he said, "I want him to remember a father who stood. Not one who watched." Andromache did not weep. That would come later. Now she simply nodded. Hector turned and left through the archway. By the time the guards opened the gate to let him ride out, he was once again the warrior. The armour was back. The helmet hid his brow. The man had become the symbol. Troy watched him go, and the world held its breath. Outside the gates, the world was made of dust. Not the clean dust of dry roads or stables, but the iron dust of 9 years of blood and ash, fine as flour, but heavy as guilt. It clung to the greaves, seeped into sandals, turned sweat to clay. The sun hung low and relentless, painting the plain in gold and fire. The walls of Troy rose behind Hector like the stern face of memory. Ahead lay chaos. The war never stopped. It paused, shifted, changed rhythms. But it never stopped. And today, it roared. The Greeks had pressed hard in the absence of Achilles. Deprived of their greatest warrior, they had rallied beneath Agamemnon, who fought now not only with brute force, but with something deeper, the need to prove that he was still king. Behind him, Ajax towered like a living fortress, his shield broad enough to cover 2 men. Diomedes carved through lines like a blade through silk, glowing with the cold fire of Athena's favour. Odysseus moved in the shadows between the clangor, striking not for show but for effect. And Hector? He met them all. He did not scream or boast. He did not call down curses or ask for witness. He fought like one who had long since made peace with the idea that he would die, but refused to die for nothing. His spear was swift, his shield steady. His horse obeyed without pull. He moved through the battle as if born in its centre. The Trojans followed him because he never asked them to go first. When the line wavered, he was there. When panic took hold, his voice cut through it like wind through fog. Today he led the charge himself. The Greeks had begun to push past the trench, threatening the very ships that lined the shore. If the ships burned, the Greeks would be trapped. If they held, the siege would continue. That was the rhythm now. The war fought over sand and hulls, not walls and thrones. Hector's chariot cut across the battlefield in long arcs, spraying dust in spirals. His driver shouted to the horses, but they needed little urging. They had learned his rhythm. They knew when he was ready to strike, and strike he did. He hurled his spear through the chest of Amphimachus, who fell gasping. He drove his blade through Eteoneus, who tried to parry too late. He overturned 2 Greek chariots with a single furious advance, forcing the enemy into retreat. His courage was not recklessness, it was purpose. And yet he was no monster. When he passed the dying, he did not gloat. When he saw fear in the eyes of boys barely old enough to shave, he turned away. He fought not because he loved blood, but because blood was what remained when talk failed, and always in the distance he searched for one face. He had fought all of them. Ajax, Diomedes, even Odysseus. But not Achilles. The great Greek, the golden sun, had not returned to battle. The duel everyone expected had not yet come, and in its absence, Hector became legend. The Greeks began to speak his name with awe. They cursed him from behind shields. They called him breaker of lines, scourge of the ships. Some believed he could not be killed. Others believed he would be killed, but only by the gods. Inside Troy, poets whispered verses in his name, and women sang songs at dusk, not of love but of defiance. And still he rose early, fought hard, returned late. No one saw him falter. Only once did he pause, when his cousin, a young boy barely 17, fell beside him. He had begged to join the battle. He had lasted less than an hour. Hector found him lying beneath a chariot, his body trampled, his eyes still open. He closed them. He knelt. Not in prayer, but in something older. Weariness, perhaps. Or anger too tired to burn. The gods watched. Apollo followed him often. Not openly, but in the breath between blows, in the warmth on his neck when he should have felt cold. The archer god had chosen Troy's side, at least for now. His favour shimmered like a veil over Hector's shoulders. But it was not protection. Not really. The gods protected no one from destiny. They only delayed it. And destiny was coming. The battle dragged on. The Greeks pushed, then fell back. The Trojans rallied, then scattered. Arrows hissed, spears shattered. Somewhere a man screamed a name he would never finish. At last the horn blew. Retreat. The day's slaughter paused. Not ended. Never ended. But paused. The Greeks dragged their dead from the field. The Trojans did the same. The sun began to sink, bleeding into the sea. And Hector returned through the Scaean gate, bloodied and silent, his armour chipped, his arms aching. He had won the day, but he did not smile. Behind him the plains smouldered. Ahead of him Troy waited, and inside him something had begun to turn. Not doubt, not yet, but the faintest whisper that there might be no end to this after all. Night did not bring peace. It brought silence, yes, but it was the silence of exhaustion, not relief. The plain between the ships and the city lay motionless under the stars, littered with broken shields, bent arrows, torn standards. Fires burned low on both sides, flickering like dying memories. No songs were sung in the Greek camp. No boasts were shared around the fire. And in Troy, the lamps flickered like worried hearts. Hector stood upon the walls and watched the darkness. Below, the Greek camp glowed faintly, torchlight and shadow among rows of tents and ships. The trench cut into the earth was deeper now. The wooden rampart they had built behind it bristled with spear points and silent men. They were digging in, they were not leaving. Behind Hector, the city slept restlessly. Mothers dreamt of sons they no longer had. Widows lay awake with no more tears to give. Children whispered each other into sleep with stories of their father's armour. Priam sat alone in his chamber, eyes unfocused, speaking only to ghosts. Even Helen, cloaked in perfume and regret, had grown quiet. The war that had once wrapped itself around her like fire now chafed like chains. And in the tower above it all, Hector did not sleep. He leaned on the stone parapet and let the cold air settle into his bones. His helmet lay beside him, its crest of horsehair limp in the wind. He ran one hand through his sweat-damp hair and listened. To nothing. Except something, faint, somewhere beneath the surface of thought, was changing. A stillness he could not name. There was a rhythm to war. He had learned it young. There were tides and patterns, rises and lulls, days when the gods walked openly, and days when they vanished. For years he had felt the cycle. Rally, press, fall back. Endure, rebuild, repeat. But in this was different. He could feel it in the Greeks. They were angrier now, more reckless, less coordinated. Their assaults were fiercer but thinner. Their losses had begun to mount not only in flesh, but in spirit. And yet Achilles had not returned. That was what troubled Hector most. The absence of Achilles was no longer tactical. It was unnatural, like thunder without rain, like a blade without its edge. He had never faced the man, but he had heard the stories. Everyone had. That he could run down a stag, that he could kill a dozen men in a single breath, that the gods themselves leaned toward him when he stood, a man born of a sea nymph and shaped by fire. And yet he did not fight. The Greeks burned with frustration, but Achilles stayed in his tent, his armour untouched, his spear propped against the wall like a sleeping serpent. Word had spread through the ranks. Of insult, of Briseis taken, of rage turned inward. But rage does not stay buried forever. And Hector, for the first time, felt not relief but warning. Achilles was not gone. He was waiting, and whatever he waited for would break the sky when it came. Hector descended the wall just before dawn, his eyes hollow, his limbs stiff. He passed the guards without a word. He made his way through the empty streets of the upper city, past quiet altars, past the statues of long-dead kings, past the bronze gate that led to the temple of Apollo. Inside, the priestesses had begun the morning rites, pale figures in white, chanting under flickering oil lamps. The scent of cedar and burning herbs filled the air. Hector knelt in silence, not out of devotion but out of habit. He did not speak aloud. He had run out of prayers. Outside, the wind shifted. It came from the west, from the sea, and it smelled not of salt but of ash. Later that day, a messenger arrived from the walls. The Greeks had moved again. A push toward the trench, skirmish lines reforming, chariots being drawn into columns. And still, no Achilles. Hector buckled on his armour. The bronze was warm from the sun. He adjusted the straps with steady hands. He checked the blade at his hip. He lifted his shield, still scratched from yesterday. And last, he took up the helmet. Not yet worn but known. It was heavy, not with iron but with expectation. A hush fell over the palace courtyard as he emerged. Children playing nearby froze. Servants stepped back. No one spoke. They had seen him leave like this 100 times. But this time the wind had changed. He mounted his chariot. The horses snorted. Polydamas rode beside him. Deiphobus too. The Trojan ranks formed once more behind them, bronze glinting in early light. As the gates creaked open, Hector looked back one last time. Not at the towers or the guards, but at the city as a whole. Its rooftops, its broken statues, its smoke and stone. He knew now what he had only suspected before. This would not end with walls still standing, but while they stood, he would stand upon them. Chapter 4. The Tide of Bronze. The tide turned not with prophecy, nor thunder, but with a name few sang in drinking halls. Diomedes, son of Tydeus, prince of Argos, warrior of precise rage. He was not the tallest of the Greeks, nor the loudest. He wore no plumes on his helm, no gold on his arms. But when he moved through the battlefield, men parted. When he struck, they died. And when Athena placed her hand upon his shoulder, he became something else entirely. The Greeks had grown desperate. With Achilles silent, Agamemnon wounded, and morale splintering like rotted wood, the field had begun to tilt toward Troy. Hector pressed them hard. Each day the Trojans fought closer to the trench. Already fire had touched the wooden ramparts of the Greek camp. Panic loomed, and then Diomedes rose. He had fought from the war's beginning, but not like this. That morning, Athena found him praying in the shadows of a linden tree, no priest beside him, no offering of grain, just bronze and silence. The goddess came in mist, shaped like a warrior, cloaked in calm. She did not offer prophecy. She gave permission. She whispered into his blood and lit a fire in his gaze. She touched his helmet and his shield, and filled him with a strength that did not belong to men. And she gave him one more gift, vision, not of the future, but of the divine. From now on, he would see gods on the battlefield. He would know them by their shimmer. And she warned him, strike no god save one. Aphrodite, she said, if she dares the field, wound her. And so he did. The battle that followed burned through the day like a dry wind. Diomedes led the charge, his chariot cutting the dust in wide arcs, his spear never missing. He drove through ranks as if they were reeds. He struck men not only in flesh, but in fear. His name began to pass through Trojan lines like thunder before the storm. Pandarus, the archer of Lycia, tried to stop him. He loosed shaft after shaft, each enchanted by Apollo, each deadly to any mortal. Diomedes took one in the shoulder and kept coming. He leapt from his chariot and hurled his spear through the chest of the Lycian. The man crumpled without sound. Aeneas, watching nearby, stepped forward to retrieve the body. He never had time. Diomedes struck again. This time not with bronze but with purpose. He aimed for Aeneas not as a rival but as a warning to all Troy. He shattered the prince's hip with a stone as large as a man's head. Aeneas fell gasping, his blood soaking the ground. And then Aphrodite appeared. She came not as goddess of doves and flowers but as mother. Her hands reached for Aeneas with desperation, cradling his body like a broken statue. And Diomedes saw her, and he did not stop. He drove forward with full fury and slashed at her arm. Her scream was not mortal. It rang through the field like the tearing of silk from the world itself. The wound was shallow, a scratch by immortal standards. But it sent her fleeing, her pride torn more than her flesh. She vanished in mist and perfume, and the wind around the Greeks changed. The Trojans faltered. Diomedes did not. Apollo came then, a god in defence of a son. He covered Aeneas in a silver veil and raised him from the dirt, carried him to safety. Diomedes, eyes still burning, tried to follow, but Apollo's voice stopped him cold. No more, son of Tydeus. The line is drawn. And Diomedes, shaken by the voice of heaven, fell back. But the damage was done. Aeneas was gone. Aphrodite humiliated. The Greeks surged. Hector rallied his forces, but even he felt the shift. They were no longer fighting mortals. They were fighting fury made flesh, and Diomedes had become its face. The gods, once aloof, had entered the war. Aphrodite had fled the field in shame, her wrist bleeding, her pride torn by a mortal blade. And somewhere in the vaults of Olympus, the insult echoed like thunder. It was not only her honour that burned, it was the insult to divine blood itself. From the heart of that wounded vanity rose Ares, god of war, slayer of cities, breaker of bones. He had watched the siege in indifference, content to let mortals die in his name without his presence. But now he stirred. He did not descend in wrath, he descended in hunger. For Ares loved blood not for justice, nor vengeance, nor glory. He loved it for its taste. He came to the battlefield cloaked not in divine radiance, but in mortal armour, bronze over flame, a spear so long it bent the horizon. And none knew him, not even those he fought beside. He walked among the Trojans. They felt it before they saw it. The way the dust thickened, the way courage returned. Spears flew truer, blades bit deeper. Men who had faltered found their footing. Ares had not spoken, but his presence screamed. Hector, unaware of the god at his shoulder, felt the sudden surge. The Trojans rallied. Lines that had broken now held. Arrows hissed back across the plain. Dust turned to wind, and wind to storm. Diomedes, who had carved a path through corpses all morning, paused. He could feel it. A shift. Not in tactics, but in fate. He fought harder. He cut down men whose names he never knew. He cast his spear into the chest of Abas, shattered the shield of Polydamas, tore through Trojans like wheat before a blade. His armour gleamed like molten metal. Blood soaked his legs. The earth beneath him turned slick. But Ares saw him, and the god was not amused. He stepped into the fray. Ares did not need allies. He created chaos by being near. Greek ranks bent around him. Veterans who had fought 10 years broke and ran. Horses screamed, untouchable by rein or voice. And wherever Diomedes turned, the way was now harder. He met a Trojan blade and staggered. His breath came ragged. His vision blurred. And then Athena returned. Invisible to all but him, she touched his helm once more. Her voice was clear. "Do not fear. I am still with you. But now we fight Ares." Her words were wind over fire. She took his reins in one hand and his spear in the other, and guided him straight into the storm. Diomedes saw Ares then, truly saw. Not the shape of a man, but a towering things of war-given flesh. The god turned to him, amused. "You," he said. But Diomedes did not answer. He hurled his spear, and it flew not by his strength, but by Athena's hand. It struck Ares in the side, where even gods can bleed. The scream that followed cracked the air. Not the scream of a man, nor of beast, but of divinity wounded. Ares staggered. The field shook. The Trojans faltered again, and in that moment, for the second time in a day, a god fled the battlefield. He vanished into sky, a trail of fire behind him. His rage echoed still, but his power was gone. The Greeks roared. What followed was slaughter. They surged forward, emboldened not only by mortal valour, but by the absence of divine wrath. Ajax broke a line of Dardanians with his shield alone. Odysseus led a flanking manoeuvre that routed a dozen companies. Nestor, ancient and slow, still managed to rally men to the sound of his voice. And Diomedes? He bled. His wound from Pandarus festered now, burning with infection and fatigue. Athena had stayed his death, but not his pain. His arms trembled, his eyes blurred, his spear grew heavy. He knew he must withdraw. But the Greeks pressed on. They reached the trench again, scattered defenders, and poured toward the ships. One fire, one match, and the war would end in flames. And then Hector appeared. He returned not as warrior, but as wall. He drove his chariot through the heart of the chaos, spearing Menestheus, and tearing through ranks like a god. His presence alone steadied the Trojans. His voice brought clarity. He called them back from the brink and threw himself into the gap. He stood between fire and destruction, between Greeks and their prize. And again the line held. The sun dipped low. The dead were beyond count. The dust hung like smoke. When finally the horn blew, the armies withdrew. Not in triumph, not in defeat, but in exhaustion. The plain was no longer a battlefield. It was a graveyard. The battlefield slept beneath a veil of smoke. At dawn the wind returned. It came off the sea, low and heavy, dragging the stench of blood and ash back toward the city walls. Birds circled overhead, silent. Even the scavengers moved cautiously. Nothing about the ground felt natural anymore. It was a cursed place now, a field turned altar. No trumpet blew. No swords were drawn. There were older rites at play today. By long-standing custom, when the battle was done and neither side claimed victory, both Greeks and Trojans would halt to gather their dead. A fragile, wordless truce descended, not by treaty but by exhaustion. From the Greek camp, carts rolled out, pulled by grim-faced men. From Troy, priests and sons followed in silence, dragging sleds behind them, each one already soaked with dried blood. There were no songs, only the whisper of names. Some men found brothers, some found only fragments. A greave, a finger, the scrap of a cloak. Others dug shallow graves and made offerings of olive and honey, hoping the gods would notice, hoping the dead would not linger. In one corner of the field, Diomedes sat with his armour peeled back, his shoulder packed with damp linen and herbs. The fever hadn't taken him, not yet, but his hands trembled. Athena was gone now, her favour withdrawn. And with it, the ache returned, not just of bone and muscle, but of reckoning. He had fought a god, he had survived. And somehow that was the most terrifying part. In the command tent of the Greeks, the atmosphere was worse than grief. It was calculation. Agamemnon sat surrounded by his generals. Ajax stood tall but quiet. Odysseus leaned against a post, eyes half-lidded but never still. Nestor, the old horseman, poured wine into cups no one touched. "We press," Agamemnon said. "We have to." He pointed to a crude map, drawn with charcoal on parchment. "They're weakening, we've seen it. Hector may be strong, but their lines thin with each day. One more charge, we reach the ships. We burn them." But not everyone agreed. "They held us," Ajax said. "Again, and without Achilles we bleed faster than they do. The gods will not fight for us forever." "They fight for no one," muttered Odysseus. "They fight for themselves. And we are just their theatre." Even Nestor, who had always urged action, now spoke cautiously. "The men are tired," he said. "They are brave but not endless. Give them rest, give them food. Let the wounded heal, then strike." Agamemnon listened, his face unreadable. Outside, the men murmured of Hector, of how he stood like a wall when others fled, of how he moved as if made of something older than flesh. They spoke not in awe, but in fear. Some asked quietly if Achilles would return. Most did not. They knew better. In Troy the mood was no less heavy. Hector returned from the field carrying the body of a fallen friend. He had tied the man to his chariot. Not as spoil, but because there were too many for sleds. His armour was dented. His eyes were bloodshot. Inside the palace, Priam stood to greet him. The old king did not ask of numbers. He asked only one question. "Did we hold?" And Hector answered, "For today." And that was all. He walked through the halls like a man underwater. The marble that once shone now looked grey. Tapestries sagged. Oil burned low in the lamps. Andromache met him at the doorway, Astyanax in her arms, but neither spoke. She could see it in his face. Not wounds, but weight. Later, alone on the balcony overlooking the city, Hector rested one hand on the stone railing and looked toward the horizon. He had once thought glory was something you earned by dying at the right moment. Now he saw differently. Glory was what the poets wrote. But survival, that was the truer test. To fight not once but every day. To carry the fear, the burden, the gaze of thousands who had no one else to look to. To march out knowing you may not return. Not for the fame, but because no one else will if you don't. And the gods, they did not care for glory. They had their own quarrels, their own rivalries. They came and went. They played favourites and changed sides. And men died for it. The only constant was the earth beneath his feet, and the spear in his hand. That night, as the stars emerged, quiet and indifferent, the war held its breath once more. But everyone felt it now. The tide had shifted. The gods were no longer content to watch. And somewhere in the Greek camp, behind a tent where no fire burned, Achilles sat alone, his armour untouched, his rage, not gone but waiting, still coiled, still growing. Chapter 5. The fire at the ships. The 9th year of war cracked under its own weight. It was no longer glory that held men to the plain beneath Troy, nor vengeance, nor even honour. It was gravity, the slow, grinding pull of fate that kept spears raised and chariots turning long after songs had stopped. And now, that gravity began to collapse. At first it was small things. A night patrol did not return. A water line from the springs was cut. Messengers vanished in the hills. Then came bolder signs, Trojan scouts seen near the trench, an ambush that killed 3 captains, the sound of horns in the dark too close to the rampart. And then just after dawn, the attack. It did not come with warning. No challenge, no drums, just hoofbeats and dust. The Trojans surged over the plain like a wave released, bronze flashing in the early light, chariots screaming through the wind. Hector led the charge. His spear struck the first blow. His war cry tore the silence. The trench that had held for weeks, months, was overrun in a single hour. The Greeks had grown complacent. Their outer defences, once watched with discipline, had thinned. Some captains believed Troy would never dare so bold an assault. Others whispered that the gods had finally turned away. They were wrong. The Trojans had grown tired of defence. They had watched their sons die behind walls. They had buried friends while waiting for the Greeks to weaken. But now Hector's fury had become their courage. His voice rose like a tide, and behind him came not only men, but the will of a city that had nothing left to lose. Hector drove his chariot straight into the Greek barricades. The wooden palisades splintered. Greeks scattered like startled birds. Some fought. Others fled. Ajax stood tall among them, shield in hand, roaring orders, holding ground by brute force. Odysseus ran through fire and blood, rallying soldiers by name. Nestor, too old to fight, still rode among the wounded, calling out tactics with cracked lungs. But the Trojans kept coming. Not just Hector. Deiphobus. Aeneas returned from his wounds. Sarpedon, son of Zeus, his bronze armour glowing as if lit from within. Lycians, Dardanians, allies from beyond the sea. The plain trembled beneath their feet. The Greeks were driven back step by step until the sea stood at their backs. And before them fire. The ships. The lifeblood of the expedition. If they burned, the war was not lost. It was ended. Not in defeat. Not in retreat. In annihilation. And Achilles still did not rise. In his tent, away from the screams, he sat as he had sat for days. Polished armour, untouched spear. Briseis gone, pride broken open but not surrendered. Patroclus watched him, helpless. The camp burned on the edge of the horizon, and still he sat. The smell of smoke reached the sea. It clung to the sails of the beached ships, to the canvas of the tents, to the sweat-slick hair of soldiers who now fought not for conquest but for survival. Fire had become a weapon. Not the kind tempered by blacksmiths, but the ancient, chaotic kind. Indiscriminate, absolute. And it was Hector who carried it forward. The Trojans had never come this far. For 9 long years, they had stared at the Greek fleet like a mirage. Something distant, unattainable, unreal. But now the ships loomed before them. Hulking black hulls lined like silent tombs across the sand. The sea lapped quietly behind them, uncaring. Hector did not pause to marvel. His chariot skidded across the torn earth, flanked by spearmen. His helmet caught the light, and the plume danced like flame. His eyes were fixed on a single goal: set fire to the ships, drive them into the sea, end it. Ajax stood in his way, the son of Telamon, towering and broad-shouldered, his shield a wall of oxhide and bronze. He did not speak. He did not retreat. He fought like a cliff resisting the tide. 3 times Hector surged forward. 3 times Ajax drove him back. The air thickened with ash. Arrows fell like sleet. Men screamed and vanished into the smoke. The decks of the nearest ship turned slick with blood. Odysseus arrived with a band of Ithacans and joined the fray, his short sword gleaming, his cloak tattered. Menelaus too, the red-haired king. Not for Helen now, but for survival. Still, it was not enough. More Trojans poured through the breach. Their cries filled the air, raw and ragged. Sarpedon fought like a man possessed, his spear splitting shields like wood. The allies of Troy, long mocked by the Greeks, now proved their worth in blood. And always behind them, the gods watched. Apollo stood with Troy. His golden bow was silent now, but his favour was not. Each time Hector stumbled, a sudden gust of wind cleared the smoke. Each time a Trojan faltered, strength returned to his limbs, like a second breath. The Greeks could feel it. And they began to break. Some tried to push ships into the sea. Others simply ran. The dead lay in piles at the feet of the hulls. Horses screamed as chariots flipped and cracked. The trench, that last great line of defence, was behind them now, meaningless. And in the distance, Achilles still waited. Patroclus saw it all. From the entrance to his friend's tent, he watched the sky darken with soot. He heard the screams, the horns, the silence that followed when someone great had fallen. He had begged Achilles to fight, begged him to let go of pride, of insult, of wrath. But Achilles had only shaken his head. "You do not understand," he said. "They dishonoured you," Patroclus replied. "But they did not dishonour them. The men dying out there, they followed you." Achilles did not move. "They will burn," Patroclus whispered. "And Troy will dance on the ashes." Still, silence. And then Patroclus made a choice. He called for armour, not his, Achilles's. He stood beneath the sun and let the Myrmidons dress him in bronze that was not his own. The breastplate, the greaves, the helmet with its long horsehair crest. When he raised the shield, men wept to see it. The Greeks thought Achilles had returned, and for a moment so did Troy. So did Troy. Patroclus mounted his chariot. Automedon, the charioteer of Achilles, took the reins, and then, like a spark against dry pine, he lit the plain. The Myrmidons poured out behind him. Greeks who had given up hope rallied to the golden armour. The Trojans, seeing the fury of Achilles once more on the field, faltered. Some fell to their knees. Others turned and fled. Even Hector paused, unsure. Patroclus struck like a god. He drove the Trojans from the ships. He reclaimed the first hull. He killed Sarpedon, son of Zeus. After a duel that shook the field, the sky itself grew dim. Zeus wept, but did not intervene. And Patroclus, flushed with success, pushed further. Too far. Victory is a drug. When it first touches the tongue, it tastes like salvation. It fills the veins with clarity, makes blood sing, and muscles forget exhaustion. It blinds. Patroclus had never led an army before. But on that day, beneath the crest of Achilles' helm, he became something more than himself. He had driven the Trojans from the hulls, speared Sarpedon where he stood, and carved through the enemy with the surety of one born to war. Around him, Myrmidons shouted his name. Greek morale soared. Even the gods seemed to hesitate, but he forgot the warning. Achilles had told him, "Go no farther than the ships, drive them back, save the fleet, then return. Do not pursue, do not test fate." Patroclus, breathing heavy, blood painting his armour, saw the Trojans scatter and followed. He surged past a trench, past the battlefield. He reached the very walls of Troy, and there the dream cracked. Apollo was waiting, not in splendour, not in song, but in silence, like a shadow standing behind his shoulder. Patroclus raised his spear again. His breath came in heaves. The gates loomed just ahead, but his limbs faltered. It was not fatigue. It was divine touch. Apollo struck not with fire, but with doubt. A shiver down the spine, a turn of the ankle, a stumble in the dust. 3 times the god struck. 3 times Patroclus staggered. And on the third, his helmet fell. The helmet of Achilles. The symbol. The lie. It clattered against the stones and rolled into the dust. And now the field saw the truth. He was not Achilles. He was only Patroclus. And Hector saw it too. He had been thrown back by the initial assault. His lines had broken. His comrades fallen. He had watched the golden figure tear through allies, through legends. He had believed, and for a moment, that the gods had sent Achilles to end him. But now he knew. This was not the son of Thetis, this was an echo. And echoes fade. Hector did not hesitate. He called his charioteer and drove forward, even as others fled. He caught Patroclus just as he turned to run. His spear found the opening left by panic. It struck just beneath the ribs, and the boy fell. Not as a hero, not as a warrior, but as a man who had tried to do what the gods themselves would not. End the war. The field went silent. The sun did not shine brighter. The winds did not howl. Only the armour of Achilles lay quiet in the dust. And Hector stood above the body of Patroclus, panting. The boy tried to speak. His mouth worked. His hands clawed the air. Blood bubbled on his lips, and at last he found the words. Already, death stands near. And fate, your fate, Hector, the hands of Achilles. And then he was still. Hector stood frozen. The words clung to him like cold rain. He looked at the corpse, at the armour, at the faces around him. The wind shifted, and even he knew something terrible had just awakened. In the Greek camp, Achilles rose from the earth. He had not heard the cries, had not seen the flames, but he felt it. A tear in the world, not of rage, but of absence. He stepped out from the tent, bare-chested, the sun glinting on his skin. And he knew. Before anyone told him. Before the Myrmidons returned with the broken body. He knew what had happened. And the sea, far behind, seemed to still. That night Troy did not celebrate. The gates closed. The fires burned low. Hector sat alone beneath a portico, the stolen armour folded beside him. It did not gleam the same. He had won the day, driven back the Greeks, killed the one who wore the golden helm. But his mind was not calm. He had killed the friend of Achilles, and the storm was coming. Not from Olympus, not from fate. From a man who had chosen, until now, to stay silent. And now he would speak in blood. Chapter 6. The return of Achilles. Grief does not come like a storm. It comes like tide water. Quiet at first, then everywhere. When the body of Patroclus returned to the Greek camp, draped in blood-stiff linen, silence fell across the shore. The Myrmidons, who had once followed him into fire, now walked as if under a spell. Not a man among them met the eyes of their captain. Achilles stood apart, not by distance but by presence. He did not cry out. He did not fall to his knees. He looked upon the dead with a stillness so absolute that even the birds above the sea stopped circling. He reached down, gently, as if afraid to wake him, and lifted back the cloth. The face beneath was pale, the wound gaping. But it was the absence that hollowed Achilles. He had lost more than a friend. He had lost his reflection. They had grown together like roots of the same tree. Patroclus, gentler, slower to rage, full of laughter that lit the dullness of camp life. It had been Patroclus who fetched water, who calmed the horses, who knew which herbs to pack for wounds, and which songs could still comfort the men. It was he who had spoken up when others fell silent around Achilles' wrath. Now there was only silence. Achilles touched his friend's face once, then turned away. He walked into the surf. Not deep, just until the waves lapped against his ankles. He looked out across the sea, not at the horizon but into the water itself, as if searching for something beneath the surface. And then he called her name. Thetis. It was not shouted. It was spoken with the weight of a lifetime. And she came. From the depths she rose, silver-footed, immortal, eternal. The sea broke open in silence. She did not walk upon the waves. She was the waves, given form. Her eyes were like polished stone. Her skin shimmered with the memory of coral and tide. When she saw her son's face, she knew. She wept, though gods are not meant to weep. "My child," she whispered, drawing close. Achilles did not look at her. "He was all I had," he said. "I know." "They killed him," he said. "Not fate, not chance. Hector." The name clanged like bronze. Thetis placed a hand upon his shoulder, as she had when he was a boy. "You must not return to war." "I must." "Your fate." "I know my fate," Achilles interrupted. "I will not live long. I will not grow old. That was always the cost." He turned to her now. "But if I cannot have peace, I will have vengeance." Thetis looked at him for a long time. Then she nodded. "I will bring you armour," she said. "Armour not of this world. Armour that no man has worn. Armour worthy of what comes." And she vanished beneath the sea. The next morning the Greeks awoke to drums. Not horns, not calls. Drums. They came not from orders, but from the heartbeat of the camp itself. Word had spread before sunrise. Achilles had returned. Men stood outside their tents with eyes full of disbelief. Some wept. Others laughed. Many simply stared at the horizon. And then he emerged. Not in bronze, not in glory, but in black. Unarmed, barefoot. His hair tied back with a strip of red cloth. He walked through the camp as if through a dream. Soldiers parted before him. Captains bowed their heads. Even Agamemnon said nothing. At the pyre he stopped. Patroclus' body had been placed upon a bier of cedar and olive wood. Perfume had been poured, flowers laid, but the fire had not yet been lit. Achilles stood before it and spoke. "I was not there," he said. No one answered. I stayed in my tent. I let my pride grow fat while the world burned. I called him brother, and I was not there. He looked up, not at the Greeks, but at the sky. I return now, not for you, not for honour, not for the gods. I return for him. And that night, the sea brought thunder. Thetis returned with armour, not forged by man, but by Hephaestus, one god of flame, smith of Olympus. A shield so vast it bore the image of the world, a breastplate that gleamed like the first sunrise, a helm whose crest whispered when the wind passed. Achilles took it in silence. The next day he would wear it, and the war would become something else. The morning sky was red, not from omen nor from blood, but from fire. A pyre taller than a house had been built during the night. Patroclus would not go to Hades in shadow. Achilles had ordered every man of the Myrmidons to contribute cedar logs, olive boughs, even ship's timbers. They stacked the wood into a tower, and upon it they laid the body of his friend, washed clean, oiled and dressed in linen. The camp stood in silence. No harp, no chanting. Only the crackle of flame as Achilles stepped forward, carrying a single torch. Agamemnon stood nearby, saying nothing. This was not his place. For the first time in many years, he was not the centre of war. That place belonged now to the son of Peleus, who stood barefoot, unarmoured, and unblinking before the bier. He raised the torch and spoke. Patroclus, he said, son of Menoetius. My heart. The words were not practiced. They came as water from a broken jar. You went to battle in my place. You wore my armour. You stood where I would not stand. And for that, you died. The wind shifted. I was wrong, Achilles said. I chose wrath. I chose silence. I let you go alone. The flame touched the edge of the pyre. The dry olive branches leapt to life. I will not rest until Hector lies beside you. And with that, he turned away. They burned the body through the day and night. When the fire collapsed to ash, Achilles gathered the bones with his own hands. He placed them in a golden urn, a gift from Thetis long ago. He did not speak while he worked. He did not weep. Then came the games. Even in grief, the Achaeans honoured their own. Funeral games were not a mere tradition. They were a rite of identity. Chariot races, spear throwing, boxing, wrestling. The old and young alike competed, not for glory, but to be part of Patroclus' memory. Achilles presided but did not participate. When prizes were awarded, bronze tripods, cloaks, swords, horses, he distributed them with precision, never smiling. When the contest ended, the men feasted, but the food tasted like dust. And then, the real war resumed. Before returning to battle, Achilles called an assembly. This was not theatre. This was reckoning. Agamemnon came, flanked by guards and generals, his head unbowed but his gaze cautious. He had taken Briseis. He had refused to yield. He had driven Achilles into silence. And now? Here stood the man he had wronged, tall as ever, firelight dancing along his bare arms. I am here, Agamemnon said, to make amends. Achilles said nothing. I was blind, the king continued, and foolish. I do not deny it. He gestured to the side. Servants brought forth gifts, tripods, gold, cloaks, horses. Briseis stood behind them, silent and pale. I return what I took, and more. I swear before all the Greeks, before Zeus himself, that you are the greatest among us. At last Achilles spoke. I do not care for gold, he said, nor for Briseis, who deserves more than to be passed between us like a prize. He looked up, and the fire in his eyes was clear. But I accept your words, and I accept your presence in the fight to come. That is all. And with that, they parted, not as friends, but as men who understood the weight of war. Then came the armour, forged by gods, fitted by hands that shook. When Achilles emerged from his tent in bronze that had never been worn, the light of it stilled the camp. Even the horses quieted. The shield alone was legend. It held cities and oceans, stars and harvests, peace and war, a world within a disk. Men knelt before him, not in worship, in awe. And Achilles said only this, Today, I return. They had seen many champions on that plain. Ajax, tall as a tower, his shield like a rampart. Diomedes, the lion of Argos, whose spear never missed. Odysseus, wily and cold, clever even in blood. Hector, noble and tireless, a wall of will before Troy's gates. But none were like this. When Achilles stepped onto the field, the ground itself seemed to lean toward him. The bronze of his armour did not reflect light. It cast it. The horses that pulled his chariot, Xanthus and Balius, born of the west wind, snorted smoke. Behind him rode the Myrmidons, silent, close-ranked, masked by dust. But they were nothing beside him. He did not charge. He advanced, and men died simply trying to stop him. Hector was not at the front. He had returned briefly to the city. Priam had summoned him, not to beg, but to understand. To ask, do we still have a chance? And Hector, for the first time in 10 years, had no answer. He did not see the sky darken when Achilles raised his spear. He did not hear the thunder from the sea when the first line of Trojans broke. But the plain told him. It told him in the way dust lifted, in the sudden silence of the birds, in the absence of Apollo's song, because even the gods had turned. The first man to meet Achilles was Aeneas, son of Aphrodite, brave and bold, veteran of countless duels. He did not hesitate. He met Achilles spear for spear. But there is a difference between courage and doom. Achilles knocked aside his shield like a child swats a reed. The haft of his own spear crushed Aeneas's ribs. The blow sent him tumbling across the earth. Only Poseidon, watching from beneath the sea, saved the Trojan by enveloping him in mist and bearing him away. Achilles moved on. He did not chase cowards. He sought blood worth spilling. The river Scamander ran red. Trojans tried to flee across it, but Achilles drove them into the current. He did not spare. He struck them down in the water, in the reeds, as they cried for quarter. Even those who had once offered ransom, gold, silver, horses, he killed without pause. He spoke only once. You took him from me. And the river itself heard. Scamander, god of the waters, cried out, Enough! Cease! You clog my streams with corpses. You defile my banks with blood. But Achilles, who had lost everything, answered only with steel. He waded into the current, struck at the god with sword and shield. Scamander rose in flood in fury. But before water could crush him, Hera intervened. She sent Hephaestus, fire against water, and the flames drove the river back into its banks. Even nature could not halt him. At last, Hector returned to the plain. He had donned his armour. He had said farewell to Andromache. He had kissed his son. He had looked once more upon the towers of Troy and said nothing. Now he waited alone. He stood before the gates, not to protect the city, but because there was no one else left to stand. Achilles saw him. Their eyes met across the torn field, and all time seemed to hold its breath. Hector spoke first. I am the one you seek. Achilles said nothing. I killed your friend, Hector continued. He fought bravely. He deserved more than what I gave him. Achilles stepped forward. This ends now, Hector said. And then he charged. They clashed like gods. Spears flew, shields cracked. Bronze met bronze, dust and blood and light. Hector fought not to win, but to be worthy of death. He gave everything, all his strength, all his skill, all the love he bore for his city, his wife, his son. But Achilles was beyond mortal now. The spear of Peleus his son pierced the neck beneath the collarbone, not instantly fatal. Enough to speak. Hector fell, dust in his mouth. He looked up at the man who now stood over him, and he said, Grant me this. Return my body to Troy. But Achilles' eyes like burning stone said only, No. He tied the body to his chariot, not with ceremony, not with cruelty, with cold. And then, before the walls of Troy, he dragged Hector's corpse in the dust, while Priam watched from the tower, and Andromache collapsed within the gates, and the gods turned their faces away. Chapter 7. The ransom of the dead knight fell, but there was no rest in Troy. The death of Hector had not broken the city's walls, but it had cracked something deeper. Fathers did not return from the gates. Sons who had marched out singing now lay strewn across the plain, their mouths open to the stars. Women lit no lamps. Children were hushed. Even the dogs, usually quick to bark at shadows, curled in corners and waited. Hector was gone. And worse, he was taken. Day after day, Achilles dragged the prince's body behind his chariot, circling the tomb of Patroclus. The dust choked Hector's wounds, his hair, once proud and curled, tangled in blood and mud. His body, touched once by nobility, was left unburied. Each day Achilles did this, and each day the Greeks watched in silence. None dared stop him. None could look for long. Yet the body did not decay. Though he had slain Hector, Achilles had not truly conquered him. Apollo from his golden halls preserved the flesh. Each morning the god wrapped Hector in light, held off rot, and whispered to the winds that this boy had fought with honour, and must not be forgotten. Troy watched from its high towers, and Priam, king of Troy, father of 50 sons, watched most of all. He stood each morning in the citadel, robes unbelted, hair uncombed. Age had bowed him long ago, but now grief hunched him further. He did not eat, he did not speak. The counsellors urged patience, then ceremony, then anger. He answered with silence. At last, one evening, as the sky turned to violet over the Dardanian hills, he rose without a word and walked to the altar of Zeus. There he knelt, not as a king but as a man broken by war, and prayed, not for vengeance, not for victory, for a body. The gods heard, and some stirred. Hermes, the guide of souls, stood beside the altar, unseen. Iris, fleet of foot and ever moving, whispered the king's words to Olympus, and Thetis, silver-footed mother of Achilles, bowed her head. Even Zeus, long indifferent, opened his great eyes and listened. That night he summoned Thetis. She rose from the sea once more, eyes swollen from weeping. "My son," she said before Zeus could speak, "has lost himself." Zeus did not deny it. He has followed wrath too far, but even in sorrow there must be measure. He gave her a command. "Go to him, speak, tell him a father will come." And so she descended again, this time not to offer weapons, but to offer warning. In the Greek camp, Achilles had not slept. He sat beside the urn of Patroclus, staring into the flame of an oil lamp. The great armour of Hephaestus leaned against the wall, untouched since Hector's death. His sword lay across his knees. When Thetis entered, he did not look up, but he knew her presence by the silence that followed her, like the hush before the sea pulls back to break again. "My son," she said gently. He said nothing. "He was your friend." Still nothing. She touched his shoulder. "Zeus has spoken. A man will come to you tonight, not a warrior, not a trickster. A father. He comes unarmed. You must listen." Achilles said only, "He killed him." "He did," she answered, "but the son is dead, and the father still mourns." For a long time the tent was quiet. Then Achilles nodded. Once, he would wait. Meanwhile, outside the walls of Troy, an old man prepared for a journey. Unlike any before, Priam did not call for chariots. He did not summon guards or trumpet his departure. He took only a cart, a simple mule-drawn wagon piled high with gold, bronze, cloth, and tripods. A ransom fit not for a prisoner, but for a prince. With him went a single guide, the herald Idaeus, white-haired and loyal. And as they passed through the Scaean gate, not one Trojan spoke. It was as if the city itself held its breath. Their king, their last great hope, was walking alone into the camp of the man who had killed his son. But he was not alone. Hermes, fleet-footed, took mortal shape that night. Appearing as a young man, kind-faced and sure of step, he approached the wagon and offered his hand. "Let me guide you," he said. "Who are you?" Priam asked, though his heart already knew. "Only a friend." And with that the three rode together, not along the roads but through the shadows. Hermes cloaked them in mist, silenced the wheels, stilled the wind. Not one Greek saw their passage. Not one hound barked. They rode straight into the lion's den, and the lion, for once, waited to listen. The tent of Achilles was darker than the night around it. Its entrance flapped gently in the sea breeze, the fire within reduced to embers. Outside, the stars scattered like ash across the sky. Silence hung thick, the kind that falls when something momentous is about to unfold. Then the canvas shifted. A figure entered. He was old, bent beneath a cloak that had once been royal. His hair was white, his beard trembling, not from fear, but from age. In his hands he carried nothing. No spear, no staff. Behind him lingered only the quiet shadow of Idaeus, and the faint scent of olive oil and earth. Achilles turned his head. and for the first time in years he looked into the eyes of Priam, king of Troy, father of Hector. The silence between them was longer than any prayer, and then Priam did something no man had done in 1,000 years. He knelt. "I come not as king," he said. His voice was low, weathered. It cracked with grief. "I come as a father, as a man who has lost what cannot be returned." Achilles did not move. Priam reached slowly into his robe and drew forth something wrapped in linen. A small object. Humble. He placed it before Achilles with trembling hands. It was a cup, not gold, not carved with myths. A simple drinking cup. Hector's, from childhood. "I taught him to hold this before he could walk," Priam whispered. "I held his hand when he first threw a stone. I watched him learn to ride, to fight, to command. He was my first light in the morning, and the last voice I heard each night." He paused. His fingers clenched against his knees. "And now I have nothing." Achilles sat frozen. "You killed him," Priam said. "No accusation, only fact." "He killed your friend, I do not deny it. He struck the blow. But I am the one who weeps for both. You lost a brother. I lost a son." The words, simple and stripped of form, landed like hammer blows. Still Achilles said nothing. Then Priam leaned forward. His voice dropped to a whisper. "Remember your father." Achilles flinched. It was as if a sword had pierced his ribs. "My father is Peleus," he said, "king of Phthia, still living, though old and bowed." "And he waits," Priam said gently. "Waits for word of his son. He does not know if you live, or if your bones already lie in foreign soil. He wakes in the dark and listens for news, just as I wake now, and hear nothing." Achilles' breath caught. The fire crackled. "I am what your father may yet become," Priam continued. Alone, without word, without closure, Achilles looked down. His voice, when it came, was rough. "I have dragged Hector's body for days. I told myself it was justice, but I felt nothing. No peace, no triumph." Priam waited. "I thought I had become death itself," Achilles said. "But now I see you kneeling here with nothing but your sorrow." He stood, crossed the space between them, and did not draw his sword. Instead, he reached down and lifted the old man to his feet. "Rise," Achilles said. "You have not shamed yourself." He turned away, breathing hard, then quietly. "Sit. Eat. We will speak again at dawn." They sat together, the slayer and the bereaved, at a plain wooden table. Achilles ordered food brought, though he himself touched none of it. He watched Priam eat, slow and hollow-cheeked. He poured water, he offered bread. No word of war was spoken. Only stories. Priam told of Hector's first hunt. Achilles told of Patroclus' first spear throw. At times they paused, not for memory, but to grieve it. When the night deepened and the wine thinned, Priam's head drooped. The old king slept where he sat, forehead resting on his arm. Achilles watched him for a long while, and when he too lay down, it was not as a warrior, but as a son. At dawn the tent was quiet. The fire had burned down to coals. Outside, the sea murmured softly against the shore, and the sky, streaked with faint orange, made even the blood-stained sand seem gentle. Inside, Achilles sat alone. Priam still slept. Not peacefully. Grief did not allow such luxuries, but deeply, the kind of sleep that comes only after months of exhaustion and one long night of courage. Achilles watched the old king, watched the rise and fall of his chest, and for the first time in many days he did not feel hatred. When Priam stirred, Achilles stood. The room was already prepared. The body had been washed again, more gently this time, the bruises cleaned, the dust wiped away. Achilles had done it himself. No servant's hands had touched Hector. He had lifted the corpse from the earth, laid it out with care, wrapped it in linen, oiled the skin, bound the limbs. Hector looked like a man again. Not a warrior, not a symbol, just a son. When Priam saw the shrouded form, his hands rose to his mouth. He did not weep, not yet. He simply placed his hand upon the linen and whispered something too soft for even the gods to hear. Achilles stepped back. "You must leave before the sun rises high," he said. "The army will not understand." Priam nodded. Achilles gestured to the treasure. the tripods, the bolts of purple cloth, the goblets. I accept none of this, keep it. Use it to bury him with honour. Priam hesitated. You have already given me more than I dreamed possible. Achilles met his eyes. I gave you what I denied myself. Before Priam departed, Achilles offered one more gift. 12 days, he said. No Greek will strike. I swear it. For what? Priam asked, confused. For the funeral, Achilles answered. Give him what he deserves. And so it was done. Hermes returned, silent and swift, and cloaked them once more. The chariot rolled back through the lines of sleeping Greeks. None stirred. None saw. Only the stars watched them pass, and only the stars wept. When the gates of Troy opened to receive the wagon, no horn sounded. But a whisper passed through the streets like wind through a forest. Hector has returned. The people came, barefoot, pale in the torchlight. They lined the streets, not with cheers, but with silence. Some knelt, others touched their foreheads to the stones. The women wailed, not for war, but for what had been lost in it. Andromache came first, then Hecuba, his mother, and finally Helen, who stood apart. She looked down at the linen-wrapped form, and her voice, low and sorrowful, cut the air. You alone spoke kindly to me. Her words were not for the crowd, they were for him, the man beneath the cloth. Then came the funeral. For 9 days, Troy mourned. Each house sent offerings. Each night fires burned on the hilltops. Bards sang not of Hector the warrior, but of Hector the man, the one who lifted children in the marketplace, who calmed horses, who kissed his son goodbye from the gate. And on the 10th day, they laid him to rest. They burned his body on a pyre, taller than any in memory. His ashes were gathered in a golden urn and placed in a tomb of stone, marked with garlands and carved with lions. The city gathered. No soldiers stood watch. No kings gave speeches. Only silence, and the sound of wind across the plain. And Achilles? He remained in his tent, beside the urn of Patroclus. He had returned the body. He had looked into the eyes of his enemy, and found a father. But the war was not over. The ships still waited. The gods still watched. And fate, night how, silent all this time, stirred once more. Chapter 8. The Fall of the Gods. For years they had whispered. For years the gods of Olympus had watched the war from mountaintops and oceans, from the edges of dreams and the shadows of temples. They had sent signs, stirred winds, bent fates with a touch from Neumnaa, but always from a distance. Even as men cried out their names, sacrificed oxen and poured wine onto sacred stones, the immortals had mostly lingered in the margins. But no longer. The death of Hector, the return of his body, and the silence that followed had shaken the balance. Achilles had changed. Priam had dared what no man dared. And now Olympus stirred, not with storms or song, but with argument. In the halls of cloud and marble, the gods assembled. Zeus sat on his throne, unmoving, his beard like thunderclouds, his hands resting on the arms of a seat older than memory. Around him light flickered from no source. His gaze fell not on the gathering, not yet, but down, far below, on the plain of Troy, where mortals waited unknowingly beneath their capricious lords. At his side, Hera seethed. She had watched Achilles weep and had not wept herself. Her hatred for Troy ran deeper than mortal hatred. It was ancient, older than Paris, older than Helen, older than even the apple. Troy had insulted her. Troy had chosen Aphrodite. Troy must fall. Athena stood beside her, calm, composed, deadly. The grey-eyed goddess of wisdom, of war, of righteous fury. She had guided spears before, whispered into Diomedes' ears, placed her hands upon Odysseus' shoulder when cleverness was needed. But now she was done with whispers. Troy stands too long, she said. It defies fate. And Achilles waits too long, Hera added. He is our weapon. Let him strike. Across the hall, Apollo raised his hand, golden, radiant, unbent. Hector was mine, he said. I guarded him from birth. You have taken what I favoured, and for that the Greeks will pay. You would defy fate? Athena said coldly. I would bend it, Apollo replied. Beside him Artemis said nothing, only narrowed her eyes. Ares leaned against a pillar, grinning. He had no side. He was war itself. Who one mattered less to him than that the field remained wet with blood. Let them all fight, he muttered. Mortals, gods, beasts. I care not, but let it be glorious. Only Poseidon withheld his voice. He, Lord of the Sea, had supported the Greeks from the beginning. He had sent storms against the Trojans. He had cursed Laomedon, Hector's grandfather, for refusing payment when Poseidon himself had helped build Troy's walls. But now he hesitated. I will not see the world cracked open, he said at last. Too many tides are turning. Then at last Zeus spoke, and all the heavens fell silent. Enough, he said, voice like the sky before lightning. You have played at sides. You have stirred the war. You have whispered into dreams and sent omens and favoured champions. But now if you descend, if you intervene, you do so not as shadows, but as fire. He rose, and all bowed. For too long man has believed he was alone in this war. Now let him see the truth. Let gods walk among them. Let Troy burn or stand. But let Olympus be revealed. His hand raised, and the clouds parted. On the plains below the armies gathered again. The truce had ended. Achilles had rejoined the fray. His grief had cooled, hardened into something sharper. Now he stood at the front of the Greek line, his armour still shining with divine light, his shield bearing the world itself. Across from him the Trojans mustered what remained. Hector was gone. Aeneas had risen in command. Paris held the bow. The wall still stood, but the strength behind them thinned. Then the sky changed. Light flickered. Unnatural, cold and brilliant. The wind ceased. And down came the gods. Apollo descended first, golden cloak trailing flame, his bow unstrung but burning with promise. He stepped behind the Trojan line and touched Aeneas' shoulder. Stand, he said. You are not Hector, but you are chosen. Hera swept down like a storm, her feet never touching earth. She stood behind the Greeks, her hand on Menelaus' back, her gaze fixed on Troy. Athena appeared beside Achilles. He did not flinch. I am ready, he said. You are not, she replied, but you will become what is needed. From the sea came Poseidon, his trident stirring the waves even from the shore. From the forest edge came Artemis, her bow drawn. And in the sky above, Ares laughed. Now war was no longer mortal. Spears would fly, shields would shatter. But in each blow, a god would guide the hand. And on that day men learned the true shape of fate, not a thread in a loom, but a battlefield. It began not with trumpet or cry, but with silence, a silence too perfect, too vast. As though the earth itself paused in awe of what had entered it. The two armies stood facing each other, shields raised, eyes wide, not at their enemies, but at what stood beside them. Gods among men. Athena, cloaked in bronze, more radiant than dawn, stood at the front of the Greek line, her grey eyes fixed not on any soldier, but on her brother Ares, who floated above the Trojan flank like a shadow cast by firelight. She did not wait. With a single stride she was upon him, and the sky cracked. They clashed with no war cry, no battle song. Ares drew his blade, black as night, thick with rusted memory, and met Athena's spear with a howl. Where their weapons struck, the air shattered. Trees along the Scamander River burst into flame. Horses reared and died from sound alone. The mortals broke ranks, scattering like leaves before storm. Aeneas fell to his knees, deafened. Ajax dropped his shield. Menelaus raised his sword, but froze as Hera passed him like a gust of cold air, her eyes burning with vengeance. For the gods did not fight for men. They fought for pride, for insult, for rivalries older than the moon. Poseidon entered next, vast, heavy, humming with the weight of oceans. He raised his trident and drove it into the earth. The ground buckled. A hill collapsed. Water surged beneath the soil, turning the plain into a mire. Trojan chariots stuck in place. Greek tents sank into the muck. Horses screamed. Apollo countered. He strode across the reeds, barefoot, bow shimmering in gold. With a gesture he stilled the floodwaters. With a whisper he aimed arrows not at warriors but at shields, snapping them like brittle bark. His arrows did not pierce, they exploded. Poseidon roared. Apollo answered not in fury, but in silence. The cold, inevitable silence of a god who knew his justice. And the mortals, they died. By the dozens, by the hundreds. some struck down by stray blows between gods. Others, in terror, cut one another as they fled. Artemis, alone among them, chose no side. She walked the edge of the field, loosing arrows into those who preyed upon the weak. A Greek who turned his sword on a wounded boy fell with a silver shaft in his throat. A Trojan who attempted to slaughter an unarmed healer dropped dead before the strike landed. She was no protector. She was balance, the silent eye of the hunt, and none dared meet her gaze. Then came the turning. Achilles moved. He had stood still for hours, watching, feeling the weight of divine presence all around him. Gods warred, men fled. But he was neither. He stepped forward, and the earth did not tremble. But the air changed. Athena noticed. Her face flicked toward him. Proud, curious, Achilles passed her without a word. His armour glowed, his shield sang. His hair, bound in a tight coil, fluttered in the divine wind. No god barred his path. No mortal could follow. He was walking not to fight, but to finish. Paris, hidden behind Troy's walls, watched. His hands trembled on the bow. He had once been a prince of decision, a judge of goddesses. Now he was a whisper of what might have been. Apollo stood beside him, urging, whispering, "Strike!" Paris hesitated. Below, Achilles drew nearer. Then Apollo placed his hand over Paris's own, guided the arrow, whispered again, "Now!" And the string loosed. But not toward Achilles, toward another, toward the heel of war itself. The arrow flew, not fast, no faster than any other. It did not whistle with some divine scream, nor shine with the light of prophecy. It was a simple shaft tipped with bronze, and yet it carried the weight of Apollo's will, the bitterness of years, and the trembling hand of a man who was once called prince. The target was not Achilles. Not yet. The arrow struck Machaon, healer, hero, son of Asclepius Maro, square in the chest. He fell where he stood before he could lift a hand. The Greeks cried out. The ranks trembled. It was not the loss alone, but the message. The gods no longer played around men, they played through them. Athena turned. She had felt it. The pulse of the divine through mortal flesh. Her eyes, cold as storm water, met Apollo's across the field. He did not flinch, but he did speak. "This is no longer your war alone," he said. "The balance has shifted. The world is not yours." Athena raised her spear. "Nor is it yours," she replied. And with a cry like shattering bronze, she flung it. The spear of wisdom, flawless, straight, lit with inner light, flew toward the god of song. Apollo vanished before it struck. The spear embedded itself in the plain, and where it landed no grass would grow again. Zeus watched from Olympus. He had not moved. He had decreed their freedom. He had loosed them from subtlety. And now he watched what they wrought. Around him Olympus shook. Hera laughed, wild, sharp, bitter. "Let them burn," she whispered. "Let Troy pay." But Zeus turned his gaze on her, and in that gaze lay not anger, but finality. "This war nears its end," he said, "and when it ends, so too shall our days among men." Hera said nothing. Athena far below froze, for she had heard. So had Apollo, so had Poseidon, who stepped back into the sea. The immortals had overreached. The war was no longer just mortal, but it would not be eternal. Even gods had limits. And they had approached theirs. On the field, Achilles came upon a knot of Trojans. They fled, but one remained, Vernicular, a boy too slow or too brave or simply too proud. Achilles slew him, and another, and another. But his strikes were quieter now. Not from mercy, but from fatigue. Not of body, but of soul. He was no longer avenging Patroclus. He was no longer silencing grief. He was simply moving forward, step by step, toward the place fate had carved out for him in silence. Behind the walls, Priam stood again upon the tower. He had seen gods fall from the sky. He had seen rivers turn against men. And now he watched his people, the remnants, scatter like wheat before harvest. No prayers came. What prayer could a man offer when the gods themselves fought and bled? Only one word left his lips. Enough. And it was Aphrodite, goddess of love, who said the same. She walked away. From the walls. From Troy. From Paris. He called after her, but she did not turn. Even she, who whose whisper had begun this war with a golden apple, now turned her back on what it had become. She was not made for ashes. The gods began to leave, one by one, not defeated, but weary. And behind them they left men, broken, scattered, half mad, to finish what had been started in Olympus, but could only end in dust. When dusk came again to the plain, there were no songs, only smoke and silence. And Achilles seated once more beside the tomb of Patroclus, his armour blackened, his eyes cast down. His vengeance was complete. Hector was dead. His body had been returned. Priam had wept. Troy had broken. But Patroclus was still gone. And Achilles, still not at peace. Mummy, Chapter 9. The Doom of Achilles. The morning after the gods departed, the sky over Troy was strangely clear. No thunderheads loomed. No divine omens lingered. The air was sharp, salt-bright and still. But the silence did not bring peace, only the echo of what had passed. The plain between the ships and the city was scorched and blackened. Trees were charred to stumps. Bronze buckles and snapped reins littered the ground like bones. No army marched. But Achilles walked. He walked not as before, not blazing with rage or prophecy. He was quieter now, slower. The fire that had consumed Hector and his legions had dimmed. It had done what it was meant to do. But ashes are heavy, and Achilles now carried them, in his steps, in his breath, behind his eyes. For the first time in years, his enemies were no longer gods. They were men again, but they did not know how to face him. When Achilles led the Greeks back to the field, the Trojans did not stand. They retreated behind their gates. Even Aeneas, brave and unshaken, gave ground. Paris vanished into the higher walls. The sons of Troy knew now that Achilles was more than man. Not because he would not die, but because he no longer feared to. He did not smile when the Greeks called his name. He did not boast when he broke the Dardanian line, or when he felled the chariot of Rigmus, or when his spear shattered another prince's shield and throat in one throw. He only kept walking forward, toward the Scaean gate, and toward the inevitable. Far away in Phthia, the sea shimmered, and from it rose Thetis. She had felt the change in the air, not through omens, but through the soft grief that hummed through the depths like a current. She knew. Her son's time drew close. She did not speak it aloud. She simply gathered the winds and returned to Troy, stepping through the salt air with the weariness of one who has begged the fates too many times. When she arrived, Achilles did not look at her. He did not need to. "I know," he said. Thetis said nothing for a long while. Then, "Will you let them strike you down, unknowing?" Achilles turned to her. "I will not run." "You could." He shook his head. "There is no peace in running." "You could live." "I would not be myself." His mother lowered her eyes. "You will die young," she said softly, "but your name will not." He looked at her and smiled faintly. "That is the trade we made." That night Thetis walked alone along the Greek shore. She whispered prayers to no one. She wept without tears, and she left behind no trace. Inside Troy the elders gathered. The death of Hector had unbalanced everything. Without him no general could hold the city's courage. No shield could quite feel firm in the hand. Even Aeneas, whose blood came from gods, did not speak as Hector had spoken. He was brave, but not loved. And so Priam, king grown brittle with loss, turned to prophecy. He summoned Helenus, son of Priam, twin of Cassandra, and a seer in his own right. "What remains to us?" the king asked. Helenus did not speak at once. He turned instead to the flame of the oil lamp, watched it flicker, watched the shadows lean and shift along the wall. Then, quietly, he must fall. Achilles, before the city can breathe again, he must fall. "Who can do it?" Priam asked. Helenus' eyes narrowed. "There is only one." That same night in the upper palace, Paris stood alone. He had heard the prophecy. He had felt Apollo's breath once more. He had held the bow, that same curved relic, carved from horn and silver, with the god's own whisper still wound around its grip. And he had heard the unspoken truth, that it would be him. Not Aeneas, not Deiphobus, not fate even, but Paris, the boy who once chose beauty and cursed kingdoms by doing so, must be the one to bring the greatest warrior of the age to his knees. He did not sleep that night. He stood upon the tower and stared into the east. toward Achilles, and toward the mark no one else could touch. The final assault came not with a roar, but with a hush. No war cry pierced the air, no drums beat. It was as if the earth itself braced for what must follow. Achilles had donned his armour, Hephaestus wrought, gleaming like flame even under cloud. Not with the pride of a hero returning to glory, but with the silence of one preparing to leave it behind. At his side, his myrmidons gathered. Fewer now, but still fearsome. Their black shields bore scars. Their eyes held weariness. But they followed him, not because of orders nor duty, because they could not imagine battle without him at its front. And he led them, straight across the plain, straight toward Troy. The Trojans did not rush out to meet them. They had done so too often. They had seen too many fall. Now they waited behind their gates, watching from the towers as Achilles closed the distance, step by step, and now it came as inevitable as dusk. From the ramparts Paris waited. He did not speak. He had strung his bow before dawn. Apollo's hand, invisible and cold, had steadied his fingers. Now he knelt in shadow, breathing slowly. He saw Achilles coming, saw the plume of his helmet, the rippling circle of his shield, the silence that followed him like mist. Aeneas beside him murmured, "Are you ready?" Paris nodded, but inside his stomach twisted like a rope about to snap. Below, Achilles reached the river Scamander, that old winding stream that had once tried to drown him, now reduced to a sluggish current of ash and blood. He did not pause. He walked through the shallows as though they were dry land, the water steaming where it touched his armour. The walls of Troy rose ahead, still intact, still proud. But he would not breach them. Not today. He hadn't come to sack the city. He had come for fate. He saw a gap in the outer wall, a crack left by some earlier skirmish, where a siege tower had collapsed and the stones had not yet been replaced. He ran. For the first time that day. He ran. His myrmidons shouted behind him. The Trojans cried out in alarm. Arrows rained. Achilles did not stop. He vaulted the rubble like a stag, spear raised, shield high. And in that moment, Paris loosed the arrow. The shaft cut the air. It did not shine, it did not scream. But it flew true. And Achilles never saw it. The arrow struck not his chest nor his heart. They were too well armoured. It struck low, beneath the greaves, into the heel. That single place, unguarded. That single place, untouched by divine fire. He did not fall at once. He stumbled. Then he looked down, almost in surprise, as if he had been nudged rather than struck. Then pain, sharp, ancient, final, bloomed up through his leg like flame through dry grass. He fell to one knee, then to both. The shield dropped. The spear followed. And the greatest warrior the world had ever seen collapsed onto the blackened earth, the arrow still quivering in his heel. From the tower, Paris stared. He had not aimed. Apollo had guided the shot. He knew that. And yet it was his hand, his bow. He had done it. He had ended Achilles, and he felt no triumph. Only quiet. Only the weight of it. Below, the myrmidons surged around their captain. They lifted his body. They screamed to the heavens. Some turned on the Trojans in blind rage. Others fell back in stunned silence. But nothing they did could change the truth. Achilles was dying. Not with a sword in hand. Not with a god beside him. But pierced by a single arrow, guided by fate, loosed by a prince who once judged beauty. Inside the tent that night, he lay on a cloak, his face pale, his lips bloodless. Thetis came again. She held his hand. He looked up at her and said only, "I thought it would be louder." And then he closed his eyes. They carried his body to the ships, not on a chariot, nor behind a column of spears, but on the shoulders of his myrmidons, silent, bareheaded, their armour dark with ash and blood. Each step was measured. Each footfall landed like a funeral drum. When they reached the tent, they did not enter. They laid him at the threshold where Patroclus had once lain. The sun was sinking. The sea turned to bronze, and the wind whispered through the guy ropes and torn banners, repeating his name, not with triumph, but with sorrow. Thetis arrived at twilight. No words passed her lips. She knelt beside her son's body and placed her hand upon his chest. His skin was still warm. She closed his eyes gently. Then she stood, tall, radiant, terrible in her grief, and spoke not to the men, but to the gods. Let him not fade. Her voice travelled like thunder. Let him not sink beneath dust. And they heard her. Even now they feared her. The Greeks built a pyre. It rose higher than any before. 3 levels of cedar, heaped with fragrant wood, draped with oil-soaked linen, crowned with golden cloth and bronze helms. Armour from 100 battles, spears from 100 slain. Upon it they laid Achilles. Beside him they placed Patroclus, his ashes, held in a silver urn. The fire was lit by Odysseus. It roared like a tempest. It burned for a day and a night, and the smoke could be seen from Troy's towers, dark against the stars, like the soul of the war itself rising into the sky. The Trojans did not cheer. They did not mock. They watched in silence. Even Paris did not raise his eyes. The next day, Thetis returned once more. From the depths of the sea she brought a final gift. Armour, forged not by mortal hands but by Hephaestus again, its surface untouched by time or flame. She gave it to the Greeks. For the next to wear, she said. Who? Asked Diomedes. She looked toward the black urn and said simply, Who dares? There was no answer. Not yet. They buried the ashes beneath a great mound beside the shore. The sand was piled high. The stones were marked with his name. And on top, they placed a single pillar, smooth white, tall enough to catch the first light of each morning. Ships passing by would see it and know. Here lies Achilles, son of Peleus, breaker of men, beloved of gods, slain not by spear but by fate. In the years to come, warriors would swear oaths at that mound. Some would pour wine. Some would cut their palms and press blood into the earth. All would whisper his name, not as a man, not even as a hero, but as something more, something that could not die. And Troy? Troy still stood. But the hourglass was nearly empty. Without Hector, without Achilles. The war's shape had changed forever. Only one act remained. Only one deception. One last breath of cunning. The city would fall. Not by sword, not by fire, but by something older than both. By the hand of Odysseus. Chapter 10. The Wooden Horse. Forced Troy had endured. Through 9 bitter years of siege, storms and sorrow, the city still stood. Her walls, raised by gods in ages past, remained unbroken. Her towers cast long shadows across the plain. Even as heroes died and gods departed, the city itself seemed eternal, carved not from stone, but from stubbornness and pride. The Greeks, for all their might, had not breached her. They had brought down Hector. They had burned the countryside. They had built altars from bones and fought in the shadow of their own dead. And yet when night fell, it was still Troy that glowed behind her high gates, undefeated. But Achilles was gone, and with him, something more than strength had departed. Now the Greek camp was quieter, not defeated, but different. The men walked slower, the councils grew shorter, the fires burned lower. The war that had once seemed like a forge for glory had become a weight around their necks. Even Agamemnon, always hungry for conquest, sat longer in silence now. And Odysseus watched. He watched not with grief but with calculation. He had mourned Achilles, yes. He had poured wine over the tomb. But he had also seen what it meant. With Achilles gone, no strength of arms would take the city. Troy was not a problem to be broken. It was a question to be answered. And Odysseus, son of Laertes, king of Ithaca, man of many turns, he knew the answer would not be bronze, it would be wood. The idea came like smoke. It was not his alone. Some say Athena whispered it, leaning down from the edge of Olympus, still watching even in her disappointment. Some say the ghost of Achilles breathed it through the salt wind. Some say it had always been there, waiting, like a seed, buried in the dust of the battlefield. But Odysseus was the one who shaped it. The Greeks would not storm the gates, they would leave them, or so it would appear. The plan began in silence. No heralds, no boasts, just shadows moving through camp. Timber pulled from the remains of burned ships. Carpenters summoned in the night. Sawing, hammering, lashing, the sound muffled by sand and secrecy. They built a horse, not a war horse, not a statue, but a colossus, larger than any beast the world had ever seen. Tall as Troy's walls, broad as a house, its flanks curved and smooth, its neck arched as if in pride. And within, space, a hollow heart, big enough for men, big enough for death. Odysseus chose the warriors carefully, not just for strength, though there was plenty of that, but for quiet, for patience, for will. Men like Menelaus, who had waited 10 years for revenge. Men like Neoptolemus, Achilles' son, young and burning with the fire his father once bore. Men like Philoctetes, who bore Heracles' bow and had endured pain beyond naming. Into the belly of the beast they climbed, in armour wrapped in cloth, with food, with water, with silence. Odysseus was the last to enter, and then the hatch was sealed. Outside, dawn broke over the Greek camp, but the ships were gone, or seemed to be. Anchors were pulled, sails unfurled, oaths were muttered, and one by one, under cover of morning mist, the Greek fleet slipped away from the shore and vanished behind the horizon of Tenedos, the nearest island. On the plain only the horse remained, and a single Greek, Sinon, crouched by the fire, waiting. In Troy they saw the smoke first, then the emptiness, then the horse. The plain that had been cluttered with tents and corpses and shields was now strangely clean, as though war itself had been wiped away in a single night. The Greek ships, always visible, always threatening, gone. And in their place, a gift, a wooden titan, silent, gleaming in the sun, and a man. Sinon let them find him. They dragged him to Priam, to the royal court. He was bound, bruised, trembling. But he did not beg. Instead he told his story. A tale spun from lies and desperation, shaped for ears weary of war. He told them he had been left behind, told them he was cursed, told them the horse was holy. A gift to Athena, built to ensure the Greeks' safe voyage home, too large to be taken within the walls without profaning the goddess. If Troy accepted it, Athena's favour would shift. Troy would rule. The Greeks, until undone by their own devotion, would never return. And the Trojans listened. They wanted to believe. They needed to believe. And Sinon, with tears and curses and oaths to the gods, gave them something to believe in. A miracle. A sign. A victory without blood. As night fell, the gates of Troy opened, and the horse, vast, silent, unresisting, was wheeled into the city it would one day destroy. The horse stood in the centre of Troy like a monument. Its wooden flanks caught the last light of day and gleamed like bronze. Children climbed its legs. Women hung garlands around its hooves. Priests sang hymns to Athena, as if their voices could mask what none dared say aloud, that it was too strange, too sudden, too perfect. But the people were tired. Tired of fear, of hunger, of waiting for the next funeral. And when Sinon stood among them, cloak torn, wrists bruised, and spoke of the Greeks' departure, of the wrath of Athena, of the future finally opening before them, they believed. Or rather, they needed to believe. Even Cassandra's screams could not stop them. She burst into the square as twilight fell, her hair unbound, her arms reaching toward the horse, as if she could pull it down with her bare hands. "Fire!" she cried. "Fire and sword! Tear it open! Burn it before it breathes!" But no one listened. Cassandra, daughter of Priam, cursed with prophecy and never believed. They turned their faces from her like from madness. Even her brother Helenus turned away. Even Hecuba wept, but did not stop the procession. Only one voice rose in tentative agreement, Laocoon, priest of Poseidon, who feared the silence of the thing more than its shape. "Do not trust gifts from Greeks," he warned, "especially when they leave them behind." And for a moment doubt rippled through the crowd. Then the sea struck. Two great serpents rose from the waves. Red-scaled, taller than men, their eyes burning with divine fire. They surged through the surf, coiled around Laocoon and his sons, and crushed them before the people's eyes. Screams erupted. The serpents vanished. And silence fell once more. Only the horse remained, watching, waiting. That night Troy feasted. For the first time in years, wine flowed freely. Fires burned not for funerals but for celebration. Harps played in the courtyards. Dancers spun beneath the stars. Even Helen smiled. She walked the walls again, looking down at the empty plain where Greek fires once flickered. Her hair caught the moonlight. Her dress shimmered like the sea. Men forgot that she had ever come from Sparta. They forgot what her face had cost. And when she passed the horse, she paused. Something in her paused. She stepped closer. Her hand brushed the wood. Her voice, low, deliberate, carried upward. Myrmidons, she said. Argives, sons of Atreus. Can you hear me? Inside the belly of the horse, Odysseus froze. The men around him held their breath. Helen's voice was no longer soft. It took on the tone of every wife, every mother, every lover lost to war. She spoke in the voice of their homes. But no one answered. She lingered, then turned away, and did not look back. Midnight came. The fires burned low. The city, drunk with joy, slept. The horse stood still. Then, a thump from within. Then silence. Then another. Then the hatch creaked. Odysseus emerged first, drenched in sweat, eyes rimmed with darkness. He rose into the night air like something reborn. Behind him came Menelaus, face tight, jaw clenched. Neoptolemus, young and sharp as a drawn blade. Then the rest. They dropped silently onto Troy's cobbled streets, spread into the shadows, lit torches from embers, opened the gates. Outside, on the island of Tenedos, the ships waited. They had not gone far. As soon as the signal rose, a thin column of flame from Troy's highest tower. The sails snapped open. The oars struck the water. The black hulls raced the tide like hounds unleashed, and before the Trojans could stir from their drunken dreams, death entered their gates. It came with bronze and fire, with torches and blades, with silence turned to screaming. Neoptolemus shattered doors with his father's strength. Menelaus moved through halls he had once dined in, now searching for Helen. Odysseus, precise and cold, drove his dagger not through warriors but through throats in sleep. The city that had withstood 10 years of siege fell in a single night, not by assault, but by trust. Priam awoke to chaos. He staggered through smoke-filled halls calling for his sons, found none. The temple steps ran with blood. His queen wept beside a dying guard, and on the altar of Zeus in that holiest place, Neoptolemus found him. They say the old king pleaded, that he knelt, that he stretched out his hands, not in fear but in grief. But Neoptolemus did not listen. He was his father's son. The gods did not speak. They did not intervene. They had made their choices and now they watched, not in anger, not in mercy, but in silence. By morning Troy was gone. Its walls still stood, in places, but the soul of the city had been burned out. Smoke drifted over the ruins like shrouds laid across a battlefield. Roofs had collapsed. Palaces were gutted. Statues lay in pieces, their broken marble faces staring at the sky, as if still trying to understand what had happened. The Scamander River ran red. The sea, which had once carried the Greeks to war, now mirrored the flames of their victory. But no songs were sung. There was no triumph in the silence that followed. Only the sound of weeping, of distant crashing beams, of prayers unanswered. Menelaus found Helen. She stood in her chamber, untouched, unarmed, radiant in the half-light like a goddess among ruins. Her face was calm, as if she had expected him. No guards, no resistance, just her. He raised his sword, but it did not fall. She looked at him with eyes that held a decade of longing and hatred and confusion. He could see himself reflected there, not as he had once been, but as war had made him. Hard, hollow, lost. And she had not aged. She had changed, yes. She had known terror, known betrayal. But her beauty was undiminished, and her voice when she spoke was quiet and final. Take me home. And he did. Elsewhere Aeneas fled, led by omens and visions, with his aged father on his back, and his young son by the hand. He left the burning city through a secret gate. Behind him Troy collapsed. Before him, exile. He would wander. He would grieve. And in distant lands, he would begin something new. Rome, not yet a word, not yet a dream, waited for him on shores he had never seen. He did not look back. Not once. The Greeks sacked the city with fury and precision. Temples were robbed, shrines desecrated. The treasures of Troy, gems, goblets, relics older than memory, vanished into the holds of ships. But the gods took their revenge slowly. Storms wrecked ships. Quarrels flared. Many never returned. Agamemnon sailed home to a wife who would kill him. Ajax the Lesser, who dragged Cassandra from Athena's altar, would drown in divine wrath. Even Odysseus, come in clever, careful, cautious, would not see Ithaca for 10 long years. Troy's curse clung to all who touched her ashes. And what of the horse? Burned, its ashes scattered, its purpose complete, its silence eternal. In time, poets would sing of it, in marble halls and smoky mead houses. They would speak of Hector and Achilles, of Priam and Helen, of war and wrath and ruin. They would tell how a city fell not to swords but to deception. They would remember the names, or forget them. But always they would end the tale the same way, not with victory, but with fire. So ends the Iliad, not where it began, with a quarrel between men, or a stolen bride, or a god's slighted pride, but in smoke and ashes, in the death of a city once thought eternal, in the silence that follows all wars, and in the question that outlives them, was it worth it?